November 2008. It's my birthday month. What did I read to celebrate? Let's jump right into it. The first book that I read in November of 2008 was Gunwork by David J. Scow. I believe that's how you pronounce his last name. This is a hard case crime book. David Scow, mainly known as a horror writer, I believe he is the gentleman who coined the term splatterpunk, one of the founders, if that's the proper term, of splatterpunk horror. Founders makes it sound like it was an organization. It was just people writing stuff, and someone said, "Hey, let's call it splatterpunk." But anyway, Gunwork. Our main character is Carl Ledbetter. He's on the wrong side of the Mexican cartel, and bad things happen to him. He wants revenge, gets some friends involved. It's a lot of gunplay, and I don't remember much about this book except for one particular thing that happens in it that I'm not going to mention in case anybody decides to read it, but there is something very bizarre that happens in this book, and it stuck with me ever since I've read it. Plot wise, any of that could have been any hardcore or hard case crime book. Generally speaking, it's a guy out for revenge. But again, one thing has always stuck with me. And if you want to know what it is, you can ask me down in the comments and I'll try to explain it. Gunwork, David J. Scow. Next up, we have, see if I can do this. It's got one of those glossy kind of library covers on it. Protective plastic. So try not to get too much glare. The Rising, Selected Scenes from the End of the World by Brian Keene from Delirium Books. This is a limited edition. Number 487 of 500. And this is a short story collection. All of these stories take place within the world of Brian Keene's The Rising and City of the Dead. From the very, very beginnings of that zombie apocalypse until the very, very end of that zombie apocalypse. I believe none of the main characters in any of these stories, but some side characters and references to things that happen in previous Rising books. It's good stuff if you're a fan of The Rising, if you're a fan of zombie stuff, especially Brian Keene's zombie stuff. It's interesting. There was just a new, like The Rising, more selected scenes from the end of the world. Came out relatively recently as of this recording. And that book, I believe, was completely a charity thing for Christopher Triana's dog, Bear. So you donated money basically to Bear's health fund. R.I.P. Bear. But people donated money to Bear's health fund, and they were made characters in all of these stories from more selected scenes from the end of the world. I want to say that maybe some of the stories in here were kind of the same way. I don't think it wasn't for Bear's health fund. But I can't remember if this was the book. I swear there's at least one more book that Brian Keene did where you could pay some money and be a character in a story. I feel like it's this one, but I'm not 100% sure. There are story notes at the end, but I didn't sit down before recording this to see if it mentioned any of that. Now, this is one of those things, this book, one of those things that annoys me a little bit. I understand it from the writer's point of view, the publishers and everybody, the people that are trying to make a living off of this. But if I remember correctly, and this is back in 2008, I think this is the book that it was said this would never be reprinted in any other format. Which is why I spent the money to get the hardcover. And then it came out in paperback. May still be available in paperback. But there are, I believe, stories, like 1 or 2 stories, maybe 3, that are in this edition that aren't in the paperback edition, and maybe then some new stories that aren't in this one that are in the paperback edition. So technically, this has never been reprinted in another format. And as I said, I can see that from the writers and publishers' point of view. They're just trying to make a living, but it's annoying for fans like me who would like to have everything, but I'm not going to buy the paperback copy just for 3 different stories. And perhaps I'll rant about this a little bit. I think I will rant about this a little bit in my weekly wrap-up, which would have actually posted before this video. So go back and watch this past Sunday's weekly wrap-up if you want to hear me rant a bit about this sort of thing. But anyway, that's all sort of neither here nor there. The Rising, selected scenes from the end of the world by Brian Keene. It is very good stuff. Very well worth reading, whether you read this or a different edition of it. Anyway, the next book that I read in November of 2008 is this weird little book, Redemption, by Shane Ryan Staley and Brian Keene. And this book has been specifically bound for Eric Smith. Ooh. This is a little novella, and it's about a guy named John, and his son disappears, and he's trying to find out what happened and perhaps find some redemption in his life. But that's kind of neither here nor there. First of all, there's this whole thing here going on. So I don't know how many copies of this book actually exist in this original format with different people's names on it. I actually went and watched, Brian Keene has a YouTube channel, and he has a series that he's doing on that channel where he talks about every single one of his publications in order. And so I found the video for this one, and he showed off his copy that had his name down here and talked about it. And then he has Dave Thomas's copy after his podcast co-host Dave Thomas passed away. Brian Keene kept some of his books. One of them was this with Dave Thomas's name. So I know there's at least 3 of these in existence. But what Brian Keene talked about was that he does not consider this a true collaboration. I'm sort of paraphrasing, which is why he hasn't included it in he doesn't include it in his bibliography. Is that correct? Is that what he said? Doesn't include it in places because he simply, he says his memory of it is Shane Ryan Staley said, let's collaborate. Brian Keene was very, very busy doing a bunch of other stuff. And so the only thing Brian Keene wrote, according to Brian Keene, is the first chapter, which is 5.5 pages. And all of the rest of it, that is out of 81 pages. All the rest of it was written by Shane Ryan Staley. And if you go on Amazon, you can find it on Kindle with just Shane Ryan Staley's name on it. But anyway, that's Redemption by Shane Ryan Staley and Brian Keene. I followed that up with Creakers by Edward Lee. This is the Necro Publications edition, which means it could be possibly. Let's check. I didn't check ahead of time. Nope. This is not a signed edition. Crick City is a small hick town, violent, mean, and dirt poor. It's a place nobody wants to call home. But for homicide cop Phil Straker, it is home. And now someone, or something, is turning his boyhood town into a bloody sideshow of mutilation and gruesome carnage. They're called Creakers, centuries old, driven by rage and lust for revenge. They move through the deep, dark woods, deformed, shadowy outcasts with twisted faces and blood-red eyes. Now, as the moon hangs low over their ancient house, they're gathering for a harvest of terror and death Crick City will never forget. This is sort of the prototypical, would that be the proper word? Edward Lee, that southern backwoods horror. This has it all. And if you're an Ed Lee fan and you haven't read this one yet, this showcases that possibly that sort of thing that he's best known for. As I said, the backwoods southern horror, craziness, but good stuff. Creakers by Edward Lee. The penultimate book that I read in November of 2008 was Doctor Who Forever Autumn by Mark Morris. And this is a story that features the 10th Doctor, I believe he's the 10th, David Tennant, and Martha Jones, one of my favorite companions. And they are in the small New England town of Blackwood Falls for Halloween, and something evil is rising, and I think Halloween decorations are coming to life, and just all sorts of crazy spookiness. This is a scary Doctor Who story, and it's Mark Morris, who's a great author, so good stuff. And it was one of those nice, I feel like I still have this hidden somewhere, but I don't think I do. There's like a tiny chance that I still have this somewhere. But it was these nice, almost mass market paperback size, but hardbacks. Really nice series of books that were coming out for Doctor Who and Torchwood and stuff. But Doctor Who Forever Autumn by Mark Morris. And the final book that I read in November of 2008 was The Reach by Nate Kenyon. And this is about a young girl named Sarah who has been diagnosed with schizophrenia, and she's being kept in the basement of a mental hospital, being kept comatose. But it turns out Sarah has special abilities, and people are trying to exploit those special abilities. A student, I believe a college student named Jess, is trying to help Sarah and help her escape, help her get away from these evil people that are trying to exploit her powers. I like this kind of stuff. Nate Kenyon's a fine author. Only read a few of his books. Don't know, haven't heard his name much. I don't know how much he has done. This is a leisure book, and I like the government or organizations experimenting on kids with powers. I like that kind of book. So this is my kind of thing. So that's The Reach by Nate Kenyon. And that's everything that I read in November of 2008. And question for the video, I actually thought of ahead of time for once. And the question is based on the Rising selected scenes from the end of the world. And it is, what work of fiction or series would you like to see or read more stories that take place in that world, but not focused necessarily on the main characters in that particular work of fiction or series? And this is, we have The Rising selected scenes from the end of the world, and the second book there. We've had Earthworm Gods selected scenes from the end of the world. So another Brian Keene with stories taking place in his Earthworm Gods world. And there's also the Clickers, whatever the anthology is called. There's a Clickers anthology. So it's a bunch of stories with the Clickers from J.F. Gonzalez and another gentleman whose name I do not recall. I apologize. And then J.F. Gonzalez and Brian Keene wrote a bunch of Clicker books. And then there's actually another Clicker book that I want to say is by Wiley Young and Stephen Kozanowski, but I'm not 100% sure. But there is an anthology of Clicker stories. And of course, most recently, to my mind, there was The End of the World as We Know It, new tales from Stephen King's The Stand. And actually, I just did a whole book bundle on anthologies based on intellectual properties. So, quite a few examples of short story collections, whether a single author collection or an anthology, multiple author collection, that take place in existing worlds. And my answer for this question actually kind of ties in with The Reach by Nate Kenyon, because the answer I came up with was Stories of the Shop from Stephen King's Firestarter, or even The Institute. But because I really, really like the, again, secret organization or government organization, usually a secret one, experimenting on kids with powers, even The Fury by John Ferris falls into this category, but I went with The Shop from Firestarter. Just, what other experiments are they doing? What other kids have they been experimenting on? And how did that go? Why were they so adamant to get the young girl from Firestarter? Was she special? I mean, she was obviously special, but was she more special than anybody else, or has anyone else come along that was more special than her? I wouldn't mind seeing more stories there. But what about you? Let me know in the comments below. If you have any comments, questions, or corrections, please put those in the comments below. Comments are open for spoilers. Just post a spoiler warning. We try to be polite here on my channel. Please like, share, and subscribe, all the usual YouTube stuff. If you'd care to follow me on other social media, I'll have links for my Instagram and Blue Sky in the description below. And that's all I have for you this week. So until next week, read more books.